taking a chance. Telling me to dance, taking a chance. Telling me to dance, taking a chance.
Welcome, everyone, to an all-new season of My Way, conversations with entrepreneurs doing business outside the box. I'm your host, Jessica Dugas, and I'm super excited to be back with you for another season, another episode, another fantastic guest. It's been a fun time getting to know our guest this evening, and I can't wait to bring her on the screen with you. I want to tell you, first and foremost, thank you so much for all the support we got in season one. We had some incredible guests, and it was an emotional experience to take that final episode where we looked at all the clips from all the amazing guests over the year and just see how many incredible people there are in the world doing just amazing things. So thank you so much for that support, and we're excited to be back with you this season. Our guest this evening is an entrepreneur hailing from a small town in southern Italy. Through her passion for culture, her company, the Military Editor Agency, was born. She's an author, a wife, a mom, and we are thrilled to have her here today. Please welcome Brunella Costagliola to the show. Brunella, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here with us this evening.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I can't believe this is already season 2. I'm thrilled to be your guest. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's an exciting role to play, to be the first guest of the season.
Right?
Really, and I can't wait, because I had a moment last season where we did, like I was saying, that kind of overview of the season at the end, and looking all the way back to the beginning, it's like, oh, I thought that was yesterday. So that's what it's going to be like. Just so you know, a year from now, we're going to go, wasn't that just yesterday?
Oh, it's nostalgia. It's nostalgia. It's like when I work on manuscripts and then suddenly my authors are critically acclaimed, award-winning, and I'm like, we were just working on this together. This is amazing.
I know it. Where does the time go? That's not the topic of the episode, but that's what we're talking about right now, for sure. Miss Brittany's joining us this evening. Hi, Brittany. It's good to see you tonight. And please be sure to use the comment section to ask us questions throughout the show as well. We love to hear from you. I cheated for this episode because I got to actually talk to you yesterday to prepare for another show. You guys, she's going to be on an episode of One, which will be coming out on Friday, April the 14th. But that's kind of focused on her personal story and all of that. We get to dig into her business this evening. So I would love for you to tell us about what is the Military Editor Agency. I mentioned it in your introduction. What is it? What do you do in that business?
Right. Well, let's begin by saying that, of course, my personal life, which we explored a bit more in detail yesterday, is, of course, linked to my professional one, because there are so many personal reasons as to why I decided to start and launch the Military Editor Agency, which is a writing and editing agency catering exclusively to military authors and military-related manuscripts. And as a military spouse, I decided to start my company because I wanted to give back to my military community, which had given me so much.
I love that. I love that idea. And I think I mentioned to you back when we met initially that my dad is a veteran. My dad was Navy for 23 years. And some people had told him throughout the years that he should write a book. Do you get a lot of people in the military that want to explore that option?
I do, and I always encourage them to, especially, for example, so many authors in the past 2 years, I would say, have come to me letting me know, hi, I am a Vietnam veteran, and I'm finally ready to tell my story. Why are they finally ready now? Because during the Vietnam War and also for many years after, Vietnam veterans were not necessarily welcomed back into the country. So they felt as though they had to hide from their own fellow citizens and somewhat be ashamed of what they did. But now they're finally telling their stories their own way, taking control of the narrative and finally letting it out, setting the record straight and embracing that part of their lives. So I get it a lot. You should definitely write a book, or people who come to me and say, hey, I've been told by family and friends I should really write a book. And I say, yes, exactly. You should write that book. Don't let this story stay with you or within you. Share it with other people so we can learn from it.
Yeah. You hear that, Dad? Dad, if you're watching, Brunella is telling you to, yes, write your book. If you needed a sign, Dad, there it is. I love that. And so even in like you're doing business your way, which we'll get into in a little bit, but you're also creating the space, like you said, for them to do it their way, to tell their story, to tell their side of things. I would imagine with the things that our military go through, that it's a situation where it could be a very therapeutic experience for them. Have you experienced that side of it?
Definitely. In order to write a book, especially when it comes to memoirs, which is usually what most of my authors come to me for, is a memoir. In order to be able to write that memoir, you have to do something that is incredibly difficult. You have to sit down with your emotions. Let that sink in. You have to sit down with your emotions, whether that is anger, which is usually nothing more than a veil covering real emotions, regret, pain, but also joy, happiness, and resiliency and strength. So it is incredibly hard. I always say that I'm not just a ghostwriter or editor. I also double as a therapist, because there have been so many authors of mine. We sit on the phone at times for hours, and you know what? Sometimes most of these hours are spent crying. But it's the only way through it. One of my authors, for example, she has written 3 books, and all of them have been highly acclaimed by the critic, and they have been award-winning, best-selling. Our very first phone call, she had to tell me that her husband had passed away only 3 months prior. She was, I think, if I remember correctly, 35 years old. Wow. So she was what we in the military called a gold star spouse. And she had two small children, I believe under the age of 3 at the time, and pregnant with their third one.
Wow.
And her active duty Navy officer husband had just passed away. But she wanted to write a memoir of their love story because she told me, I never want to forget the way he looked at me, the way I felt every time he touched my hand, the way he looked at our baby girl for the very first time. So during that first phone call, she cried, I cried, but we got through it. We wrote her book, and then another, and then another. And now, it's a process, but it's one that I never allow my authors to go through alone.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I've heard the publisher and editor role often being described as like a midwife as well, where this is their baby, this is their idea, and you're just helping them birth it into the world, right?
100%. And also my role as not only as a ghostwriter, but also as an editor is to ensure that my author's voice stays intact and they tell their story their way. Fortunately, in recent years, there have been many positive changes within the American publishing industry in that it's become easier for authors to publish their stories and take control, truly take control of their publishing journey and not having to abide by at times obsolete standards that some of the traditional publishers had put in place and that are, however, now changing. So we do see some change there, but the fact that I don't know, organizations like Amazon have made it so much easier for authors to be able to publish their story their way, and not to have to compromise on very important things such as voice. It's allowed many of my authors to fulfill their publishing dream, but also achieve publishing goals. It's not just a matter of being able to write your story. As I always remind my authors, publishing is first and foremost a business. So we have to remember that everybody who works in the publishing industry, including the author, of course, wants to also make money.
Yeah, that part of it is something that I think we forget. I know for me, as I wrote for a couple different books, the first opportunity I had to write for a compilation of stories, it was a whole team of people behind that, so it became an international bestseller overnight, and it was nice to see that. It's easy to see that, but then when it came to publishing my own book myself, and it's just me and Amazon, it was getting it done, and then it's like, oh, I have to do something now. Like it's great that they have you then, because you're able to guide them through and have them remember, like, look, you're not just sitting down to do this, but there's other things that can and need to be done as well, right?
Right. And as a boutique writing and editing agency, I take great joy and great pride in being able to focus on quality and not quantity. There are many organizations out there, writing and editing organizations, who offer the same services that I do, who, however, I have found focus more on quantity because, of course, the more books you work on, the more money you make. But then it's inevitable. You lose sight of quality and it starts to show. So for me, it's always been about quality because it also allows me to engage with one or a few authors at a time. And I'm able to really follow their manuscript sometimes from idea, from the birth of an idea to then turning that idea into a publishing plan, then into an outline, and then into a chapter by chapter manuscript as we proceed along, until finally, like it happened today. And I really want to shout out to my client and dear friend Julie Tolley. Her memoir, Dispatches from the Cowgirl, published by an amazing independent publisher, W Brand Publishing, was just given the honor of becoming a finalist for the Independent Book Publishers Association Ben Franklin Award. So it's for me, it's everything. It means everything to be able to form these very deep relationships with authors of mine who allow me to be there, not just for the editing process, but truly to also become their cheerleader as I see their book come into the world and receive the accolades and receive the merit that I knew was there from the very moment my authors told me, "Hey, I have this idea. What do you think?" And I stand on the sidelines and I cheer them on, and it's such an honor and a privilege.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I want to ask you really quickly before we get into some of the ins and outs of your company. You mentioned being a ghostwriter. Can you explain to everybody what that actually means? Because I think sometimes we've heard the phrase and not really known what that means. Does it mean somebody gives you an idea and you run with it and write the book for them? Tell me what it means to be a ghostwriter.
It's a great question. Well, if you were to ask my children, they would tell you that I go boo. And but a ghostwriter, which I have to say, in recent years, also thanks to celebrities, the figure of the ghostwriter has become more prominent because celebrities have finally started to be a bit more honest about who truly writes their books. And, we see it with, for example, Spare, Prince Harry's memoir. He gave credit to his ghostwriter. And the figure of the ghostwriter at first had been very much in the background. We are the people who have the skills and the time to be able to write a book. Most of my authors are, they have full-time careers. They can't step away from them to sit down and start writing their book. So it's just easier for them to be able to hire somebody with skills and time who can write their story on their behalf. However, I want to make sure that I specify it's definitely not my idea. If a book has success, if a book I ghost wrote becomes successful, it's not because I ghost wrote it. It's because my author had this incredible story. So the way I like to work is I do not accept clients who say, I have a story, here's the idea, now contact me back in 6 months when you have a manuscript written. This is, again, it's quality, not quantity.
Right.
So I definitely do not engage with clients who just want me to keep writing without actually investing any time or creativity in the manuscript. The way I like to work, in order for me to become a ghostwriter, I have to truly get to know my author. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to mirror their voice, and the book just won't sound authentic, especially to people who know my authors. They're going to be able to tell in a minute if that book sounds like them or not. And I'll give you an example. What I consider to be my very first important job, ghostwriting job in the publishing industry, happened in late 2012. Early 2013. And I was hired as a ghostwriter by a wonderful woman. She lived in Los Angeles, and she flew me to Los Angeles to live with her for some time. We engaged every day because I lived with her and her husband. She's now unfortunately passed away, but her name was Gloria Goldwater, and she was married to the late John Goldwater, creator of Archie Comics. And she herself had decided one day to start in the early 80s, one of the very first hip hop magazines in New York City. And she, this magazine, which was called Superfly, this magazine launched the careers of so many artists that we still admire to this day.
Wow.
But for one reason and another, eventually she had to stop with the magazine and she just moved on with her life. But I believe I met her when she was in her 70s, and she had decided that she wanted to tell her story. she wanted to let the world know what she had done with this magazine, which was by then way out of print and probably mostly forgotten. And so she hired me as her ghostwriter, and we started working together on her memoir, which is called Superfly: My Untold Story of Hip Hop. And she had, every time she told me stories, which were so incredible, one more incredible than the other, and I truly couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, she was having tea parties with gangster rappers at her office, if you can imagine that.
Wow.
And pointing the finger and saying, no, we don't say these not nice words and so forth. So she was keeping them at bay. And every time she would tell me a story, it was as if she herself couldn't believe that she had done this. So she would conclude every story with, go figure. And I kept hearing this and noticing how she kept finishing every story she told me with, go figure. And guess how we ended her memoir?
Go figure.
So it's, you have to know, as a ghostwriter, I need to know. I feel like maybe not every ghostwriter works this way, but the way that I engage with my authors definitely is important to me. I need to get to know them, and they need to get to know me, because they need to be comfortable enough to be able to share at times some of the most tragic, perhaps vulnerable stories that more often than not, they've never even told their significant other or parents. So we need to establish that relationship, that mutual trust and respect, in order to truly allow the manuscript to shine and become a successful book.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you can tell just the way you talk about it, the care that you take and the respect that you have for these stories that people want to bring into the world. What would be someone's reason for picking a ghostwriter as opposed to just writing it themselves?
Well, I think the process can be rather overwhelming, if the writing process, at least. If I know you've written a book, and
Overwhelming is the best we can do for a word to describe it, I think, sometimes.
Right. So you have to sit down and you have these brilliant ideas, and you feel good about them, and you have the story you want to get out. So you sit down at your computer, you start writing, and then you feel like you've written 10,000 words, when in actuality you've written 49. So it can be overwhelming. It can be very confusing. If you've never written a manuscript, it's not the same as writing an essay for school. It's not the same as writing a letter. It's a very different writing process with many different writing techniques. For example, whenever I help an author of mine write a nonfiction book, so memoir or self-help, inspirational, that doesn't mean we don't use some creative writing tools. Because perhaps at times my authors don't feel like sharing every single detail about a situation, or maybe they don't want to reveal the actual name of the person involved in that specific scene. So we get creative. And unless you have that knowledge of what creative writing is, unless you have knowledge of what the publishing industry is looking for, what the market is looking for at the moment, and what the trend is, or if you don't know how to perhaps predict the next trend, because when it comes to publishing, usually by the time you're chasing a trend, it's too late. The trend is gone. And so it's a matter of knowing the business inside out. Most of my authors are not full-time writers. They are entrepreneurs. They are former CIA officers. They are very successful police chiefs. They're also everyday heroes. They are mothers and wives. And so they don't have the time to get to learn the industry inside out.
Right.
And that is when they come to me looking for help when it comes to lack of time and lack of skill.
Yeah.
However, that's not to say, and I'm sorry if I interrupt you
No,
there,
it's fine.
but I've met a couple of authors of mine who wanted to hire me as their ghostwriter. And the more we talked, the more we got to know one another, the more I got to know them, I recognized that they were they were writers. They had the heart of a writer. And so eventually I shushed away the imposter syndrome that was within them. And I let them know, you can do this. You don't need to pay me ghostwriting fees. I can be there to support you as your writing coach or as your developmental editor. It's cheaper for you, but it feels, and yes, I'm losing money. I'm not doing what a business owner should do,
Yeah.
but I can't, in all honesty, allow you to hire me as your ghostwriter when I know that the book that I could write for you is never going to be as amazing as the book that I know you have within you and that you can write on your own.
Yeah. I love how you said that what a business owner should do, because that's not what we do on this show. We don't do what business owners should be doing. So I love that. I want to get into a little bit more about your company and things like that, and how I hear through a little birdie that it was on the Forbes Next 1000 list. So we want to talk about that as well. We're going to take a little quick break, and we'll be right back in about a minute to get into lots more with Brunella. Hang tight, everybody. Breakthroughs are about more than you might think. They're about discovering who you are, digging deep, reaching to the core of your soul. They're about healing yourself, understanding your beliefs, creating a ripple effect. And it's not just those initial moments that matter. It's about using them to bring more joy into our own lives and the lives of others. It's about having fun, letting loose, enjoying every moment life has to offer. It's about finding a safe space. It's about creating connection. Join us each and every day for exclusive programming, special events, and a community to call home, where we invite you to explore, change the way you look at and live your life, and go beyond the breakthrough. So we ask you, are you ready? We'll see you online at thebreakthroughshow.com. Welcome back to My Way, conversations with entrepreneurs doing business outside the box. I'm joined this evening by the lovely Brunella, who I've gotten to spend 2 whole days with here on the Breakthrough Show Network. It's been a lot of fun getting to know her and her story. I mentioned before we went to break something amazing about your company. And I also have to point out that Brittany said that the care and compassion that she hears and feels from you is exquisite. And so I think we all are joining together, feeling your passion for the work that you do. And that's probably why the Military Editor Agency made the Forbes Next 1000 list. How does that feel for you?
Incredible. As you mentioned at the beginning, I come from a very, very small town in southern Italy. And my company is me achieving my American dream.
I love that. I love that. And you're going to hear much more about that story. Tune in to one on April 14th, Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern time to hear the whole story of Brunella and how she came here and how her company was born. And you're going to leave there so inspired for sure. How this show is all about doing business your way. And I am assuming that a lot of the people that make that Forbes list are in sort of that category where they're doing things a little bit different. What makes the Military Editor Agency different than other companies that might be out there?
Well, when I started working in the publishing industry about a decade or so ago, of course, I fell in love with all of the stories I worked on. That's always been one very important rule of mine, if you will, to simply take on projects that feel right to me, that I know are going to be, they're going to matter to me, that I will want, for example, my children to read, books I will want my children to read, books that I think are going to make necessary change in society. And I wanted to contribute to a much bigger narrative. I also wanted to champion diversity, diverse voices within the publishing industry, which, to be completely honest with you, when I first started working, it was definitely lacking. There was, you wouldn't see many Black authors being able to traditionally publish. But fortunately, look, in recent years, the publishing industry has started to make some change. We have a long way to go still, but hopefully we'll get there. And I feel that as I was working in the publishing industry and learning also about the business from the inside out, at the same time, I was also a military spouse, a very proud military spouse. And my two worlds, military and publishing, have been coexisting for pretty much, the same amount of time. So more or less 10 years. But what I noticed was the publishing industry seemed to be completely unaware of the military community and the incredible stories I was hearing from friends and my husband's colleagues and military spouses, military children. It's not just about the service member story. Yes, it's the service member who deploys, but who stays home? Who really carries the family unit? It's the military spouse. And it's the military children who also have very different experiences, of course, from the military service member. So I started to think, why doesn't the military community, why aren't we aware that there is a publishing industry who could truly benefit from some of these stories? Our military community is incredibly diverse. I mean, look at me, I'm Italian and I'm married, my husband married an Italian. Yeah. He's American. I have military spouses. I've met military spouses from virtually all over the world. So we have so much diversity here, but we also have so much strength and love for what we do. And I don't believe you're going to find a community who loves this country more than the people who willingly choose to serve it, whether they are the service members themselves or the spouses who say, I do. Because let me tell you something, even though I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I said I do to my beautiful husband, I learned. So it's a commitment that you make and a decision that you make. Sometimes you have to make that decision every day you wake up that you want to stay married, even though his career is so demanding, forces you to put your family's needs after the country's needs. So as I saw this lack of knowledge between the publishing industry and the military community, I thought to myself, well, what can I do? How can I bridge that gap? How can I bring military stories to the publishing industry? And that's when I decided to create my company, the Military Editor Agency. And that's how I was able to use my skills and bridge that gap and finally bring the incredible military stories I have been hearing for so many years to the forefront of the publishing industry.
Let me just pause and say thank you for that, because you're right, it is a very diverse community. And I think of, as you were talking about you and your husband, I think about my uncle when he was in the army and he met my aunt in Germany. She was German and then they came back here to live, and what a beautiful diverse and culture that it brought to our family, having someone from Germany, and so it's such a cool thing that you're doing, and a moving thing that you're doing, because these stories need to be heard, and to have a place for them to go that will accept them. Without question, it's a beautiful thing that you're doing. So I just wanted to pause for a minute and just honor honor that work because it's really special. Do you now, is your working with military writers, is that firm, or do you take other other people as well?
I have taken other people as well. As long as I feel that I can truly contribute to the project, as long as I feel that me and my author will get along and we can establish a trustworthy and respectful relationship, then I take the project on. Yes, I've made exceptions in the past and I will continue to make them. I think just like in every important relationship, trust and respect are what matters the most when it comes to choosing your ghostwriter or your editor, or in my case, my author. It's not a quick process. And some of my authors at times need to pause because they just can't talk about that scene that we need to write in chapter 4, or they life happens and they need to put a pause on the project, and then a year or two later they come back and they say, okay, I'm ready. All right, let's keep going then. So I mostly work around their schedule. You can't force the creative process. It needs to be organic. Some days can be better than others. Some days you sit at the computer and just fly through 3 chapters. Other days you stare at the computer and you cry because you can't even write chapter 4, the actual title, chapter 4. The creative process is unpredictable. And the most important thing is that you have somebody there with you who reminds you that you need to have grace and patience with yourself, because this is not easy. And it's important to have somebody next to you that you really trust, and that is there to help you through it. I'll give you an example about myself. Aside from being a ghostwriter and an editor, I'm also a writer. And it was, writing my own book and sharing some personal stories has been excruciatingly hard. And after I wrote the first draft, which I always tell my authors is really just you telling yourself the story, it's not the draft that's going to, turn into the successful book. I learned a hard lesson, and I thought, well, I'm an editor. I don't need an editor. I was being arrogant. And then the second draft had to begin, and oh my goodness, I was lost. I was completely lost because I was so emotionally invested in the manuscript, as it is so close to my heart, that I could not look at the manuscript with the brain and the logic of an editor. So I hired an editor. I went to a dear friend of mine whom I trust very much. I know she's also an immigrant herself, so she could relate to that part of my life. And I trusted her not only because of her editorial skills, but I also trusted her to, stay there and hear me cry about that one story I just have to tell. And she cried with me, and my gosh, we're a bunch of criers in this writing world. But we support one another. And I feel that once you find an editor or a ghostwriter with a heart that you connect to, and once I find an author with a heart that I connect to, that forms the most beautiful and everlasting bond, which is also the reason why after years and years, I'm still there cheering on my authors, even though we worked together maybe a decade ago.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Let me ask you a hypothetical. So someone comes to you there. Let's say I'm writing a story. Okay. And I write the story and I come to you to be my editor, and I'm telling stories in this, and you say to me, this particular line or story or paragraph or whatever doesn't seem to fit with the other things that are in there, and I am determined. I'm like, but this is so important, and this is why, and if without it, it's just not the story. Like, do you push it further, or is there room to give in to that sentimental, nostalgic feeling that the writer has, or is it like, no, these are the rules and it doesn't fit at the end?
Oh goodness, no. There's almost no place for rules when it comes to writing. So whenever I feel that, first and foremost, after establishing a relationship with my author, so after spending some time on the phone usually, or perhaps on Zoom, what happens is that we begin to trust one another, and we begin to get a feel for one another as to what we need, what we want, and what we hope to achieve with this project. One of the very first questions I ask my authors is, what are your publishing goals? Tell me your publishing dream. And then what we do is we look at the final picture, what the publishing dream looks like, and we take steps back so that we come back to where we are at now, and we establish a plan, a map that we follow, so that we can ensure we get to that publishing dream one day. It might take 6 months, it might take 3 years, who knows? It depends on mostly on my author's schedule, but we'll get there together. So by the time I'm reading that manuscript and that passage that you were talking about, I believe I already have a sense for what is truly important to my author and what is not. However, should I come across something that I feel doesn't belong in that chapter the way it's written now, and my author feels strongly about that part of the story, we simply find a way to let it fit in. We're not going to take it out. My rule number one is respect the author's voice. I'm not there to say what should and shouldn't be in that book. I'm there to say how we can make it fit better so that it makes sense, and the narrative structure is not impacted negatively, and the flow is still smooth and organic.
I really appreciate that, because even in my experience in working with an editor on a book that I had done previously, I was telling a story that was very personal to me. And there was a reason behind the question that I asked you, but there was a moment where there was something that I wanted to put that was really important to me. And it was a firm no. This doesn't fit like it. And there's part of me that understands that, because like I said, it was a compilation of stories. It was, there was things had to go a certain way, but at the same time, I left feeling like there was parts that needed to be said that weren't. The good news is that was the experience that sparked what became this network of shows. And now I can just use my voice to tell all those little parts that got left out of the story. But I think if it was a situation where that was my book, like it was all mine, and it was, I think I would have left feeling a bit of an emptiness. So I appreciate that perspective of ultimately wanting to respect the author's voice, because even if you have that level of trust, right, you're still a different person than the author is. They lived the experience, right?
Yeah, of course. And as I always tell my authors, whenever, for example, they hire me to be their, say, developmental editor, which is very different from a line editor, a developmental editor, what I do is I offer also rewriting at the paragraph level. So if there is one paragraph on the page that I see could be written in a way that makes the message that allows the message to be conveyed in a more proper way, I offer rewriting. However, what I do is I simply offer that rewriting in the form of a comment left on the margin of the page. I never go in the actual text unless the author gives me green light to do so. And even then, I try to stay away from the actual text. And I simply let them know, hey, why don't you consider this rewriting? But all of my edits are to be taken as just suggestions. The author has, in my book and in my company, the authority, the last word. It belongs to the author, not the editor. Now, when it comes to the Oxford comma, I am not going to accept any compromises. But
what are your thoughts on the Oxford comma?
How do I feel about it? Can you tell? So when it comes to the Oxford comma, or, hyphenation and so forth, I follow what in the publishing industry we usually refer to as our Bible, which is the Chicago Manual of Style, 17th edition. And so I don't accept any compromises when it comes to the style guide used, unless it's for an academic book, which usually doesn't happen. It's mostly nonfiction, I would say market nonfiction and fiction books. So Chicago Manual Style 17th edition is the one that we use in the publishing industry. But when it comes to the actual sentence and the meaning of a sentence, if that is how my author wishes to write it and convey that message, this is how it's going to stay. It's their voice, and it's important to me to be able to respect that voice, because working in the publishing industry, as I've seen way too many manuscripts get to also important publishers and be tampered with, and the message changed. It made it more watered down, less effective. And I think it went too far at times, and my author's voice was compromised.
Are there, when it comes to the voice, now let's talk about for a minute, because I know some people who have written books or in the process of writing books who speak in a way that you don't typically read in a book. Perhaps they use a lot of slang, perhaps they have a dialect that's just their own. It's who they are. Is there room in the world of books to just simply write how you speak, or would you say that there has to be an element of editing for anyone to read it? Do you understand am I asking the right question here?
Yes, and I definitely understand. I've had this question asked by some of my authors before. Well, my question to them when they ask me this question is, what are your goals for the publishing of this book? So what do you want to do with it? If it is a book, a business book, so if they want to use it as, I always say a book is the new business card in this day and age. If you want
It feels like that.
Right? So if you want to write a book to advance your business or to expand it or to be able to sell whenever you book a speaking engagement, then of course it needs to be, yes, in your voice. Yeah, definitely. However, it also needs to be according to a certain category of vocabulary that is considered to be business oriented. If this book is something that you want to leave your children and your grandchildren, and you never plan on talking about it or promoting it, and you just want to tell your story your way, no need for editing assistance, by all means go for it. And if you feel like it, don't even use the Oxford comma, be a rebel. And
no, don't be a rebel. We like all the commas here, okay? Don't listen to her. Don't do it.
So, right, it really depends on what your goal, your ultimate goal is. You want to write a fiction book, and you want to really have a character with a Southern drawl in there as one of your characters. Oh my gosh, I'm all for it. Please add all of the dialect, all of the words that you use. Go for it. And
add y'all as many times as you want.
Please add y'all, add as much sweet tea as you want. I'm there for it.
I love it. That's awesome, and I think that's such a great advice, to ask yourself or talk to your editor about what's the goal of the book, right? Because there's different circumstances where I feel like I don't think an edit, and I think maybe this is some fear. I know it's a fear of my own, of losing my voice when it comes to should I hire an editor or not, because I'm so afraid of losing that authenticity of who I am and what I'm trying to convey. And I think there's a lot of people out there that perhaps have that same fear of, but if I don't use y'all every other word, or if I don't use the slang that I use in everyday life, it's not going to come across as me. And I think there's that fear out there. And you're saying that it doesn't have to be that way. That I feel like with you, they wouldn't have to worry about it. That it would be.
I'm not about cookie cutters. I'm
Yeah.
not about that. I'm about learning, getting to know who you are as a person, and therefore who you also are going to be as an author, and how I can help you make sure that your voice is not lost in the writing process and that you don't fall victim, of the standards that sometimes the traditional want you to abide by. But that's also why we have such a rising of the independent publishing industry now, and the self-publishing industry. We have book awards for self-published authors now. This is something that just a few years ago it seemed impossible. It seemed that unless you were published by one of the big five traditional publishers, you were not really an author. But now most of my authors actually being entrepreneurs, I feel that the entrepreneurial way of publishing an author lately has been to publish it with an independent publisher, because you have more control, more say of what happens to your book and how it happens to your book. It's not just about a financial gain or investment, it's the purpose of the book. So once you publish independently, I do believe that that is the reason why most entrepreneurs are going that way, at least my authors are, because it gives them that control that they would completely lose should they go with a traditional publisher.
Right. That's great information. I think maybe people don't realize the difference between some of the different options that they have that are out there as well. Usually, Brunella, we end the show with a question, but I actually have two questions, and I'm going to start with the really juicy one first, if that's okay. Can anyone be an author?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Every story matters. We all have a story to share. We all have a story within us. And it's important because, you know what? Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
If you don't write your story, who will?
It hurts my heart to think about, and I shared this with you a little bit behind the scenes yesterday. The stories that, because of my age, because of naive, because of whatever, that didn't get shared between my grandparents and I, that didn't get asked, that, and now they're gone, and there's no one there to tell those stories anymore. And so that's my I'm not going to cry on this show moment. The wrong show we cry on the other shows, not this one. So but that's my answer to the question, is you just don't know. There's no one else that can tell your story. And I think it's such a cool thing, you and I coming together for this show in particular, because I'm passionate about people telling their stories verbally and on the screen, and you're passionate about people telling their stories on the page. And I think pick something and then even do both if you want. That would be fun too, but pick something, because no one else is going to do it for you. You have to be the one to share it. My final question that I ask everybody that's on the show is, if we have someone watching today who is wanting to do business the way they want to, but they have people telling them they can't, or, just not a lot of encouragement, what would you say to that person that wants to start their business today?
Walk right past them. Embrace your uniqueness, embrace your vision, because your uniqueness and your own way is what is going to make your business a success. Of course, listen to advice of people that you trust, take it in, and then you have the ultimate choice of deciding whether or not to accept that or go with your vision still. The most important thing in book writing, as I found it to be in business, is that you stay true to who you are, you keep your voice, and you go with it. You have to be your own number one fan.
I love it. Be your own number one fan. That's amazing advice. I put your website down below for everybody, themilitaryeditor.com. What can people find when they go to your website, Brunella?
Well, they can find, of course, more information about books that we've previously worked on. Many of my authors are award-winning bestsellers and critically acclaimed, but they can also find more information about myself, as well as the services that we offer. We have many different services. It's not just about ghostwriting, and it's also not just about the many different types of editing. We also offer publishing consultation. So, for example, if you have questions about the publishing industry and you just want to understand a little bit more about that, reach out. I'm always willing to educate my authors on how the publishing business works. We also offer what I call sometimes, as I mentioned before, I play therapist, but sometimes I also play matchmaker. And I introduce, don't get the wrong idea, I introduce my authors to an agent, a literary agent, or a publisher. It doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes I do find myself, as I work on a manuscript, having just the perfect agent or the perfect publisher in mind for that one specific project. And as I said before, it's a, you know, like in every important relationship, it matters who you choose to be your publisher or your agent if you need one. And sometimes I happen to play matchmaker, and I have to say, so far I have 100% winning streak. So yay!
Hey.
You know. But yeah, we offered many different services. Also manuscript consultation, so an evaluation. So if you have written already a manuscript and you simply want me to give you my 2 cents, which my children always say no to, you can reach out and send me your manuscript, and I will tell you which service, if any, I think your manuscript needs. And we can talk about your publishing goals and what the next steps are going to be in order for you to reach that goal.
I love it. I love it. I highly encourage you guys to reach out to Brunella. At minimum, tell her how much you enjoyed seeing her on the show this evening. And I have to tell you again, it's been such a pleasure these last couple of days having the opportunity to hear your story. Everything about it is inspiring. And I just want to say what a genuine, authentic person you are. What a beautiful representation you are for business women around the world, for moms, for authors, and no surprise to anyone being the work that you do. You're an amazing storyteller. So I would love to have you back anytime to share some more stories with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I've enjoyed getting to know you just as much. I would love to be back, so let's keep in touch, and hopefully we'll be back together soon.
I love it. I love it. Thank you all for watching or listening wherever you are in the world today. I highly encourage you on April 14th, it's a Friday at 6 p.m. to watch Brunella's story on One, presented by the Breakthrough Show, and hear a little bit more of the personal journey that she took to become the military editor that she is today. And I just appreciate you so much for being here and sharing this time with us this evening. I'm your host, Jessica Dugas, and I want to remind you to do business your way. And we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.